we've been doing something in Culture Creators with our team, where we've been focusing on how to have transformational teams.
Yep.
And this week, we did something called the real cost.
Yep.
So we're going to talk about that on the podcast today. Can you share a little bit about why you think that's important?
Yeah, it kind of started from this quote. I'm going to read it and pull it up. It's from Max Dupree, where he says, "Leadership is disappointing people at the pace they can stand." Leadership is disappointing people at the pace they can stand. I read that quote a few weeks back and it really stopped me in my tracks, because the truth is that is what leadership really is. Leadership is a constant place of disappointing people and at a pace they can stand. And it's very profound, because I think that what we don't talk about, and we do talk about it here, is the actual real cost of what leadership means. We talked a little bit on our last pod, but there's a lot more difficult things when it comes to leadership. And so I think that is one of the things I've been thinking a lot about over, 20 plus years of leading. Like I mentioned, I think last time, I've been thinking a lot more about that. Like I've been leading now for 20 years. It doesn't feel that way, or a little bit over that. And now just thinking about, man, I wish, I would have known the cost of it. Not that I wouldn't have done it, but man, it would have helped me, because a lot of times what you go through in leadership, it's going to be difficult. You hear stuff like leadership is lonely, but what you don't hear about, man, the friendships, the things that can impact, and what it actually will cost you, and the fact that you're spending a lot of time disappointing people because you're trying to see them, leaders are trying to change things. And a lot of people, as we mentioned last time, they're not afraid of I think people like change, but more than anything else, people hate loss. And so a lot of times you're asking people to change, you're asking them to lose something. And so I think that's kind of where it's at. And I think for where we're at as a team, and I also think in society today, the world's in desperate need of leaders. You know what I mean? I think I was reading something the other day, and some of the research we've been doing on this product is 65% or something, 65-7% of executive C-suite executives don't feel that they actually have high capacity leaders within their organization.
Yeah, and 55% of CEOs believe that their greatest problem in the future is going to be developing leaders.
Yeah. And so I think it's a real thing. And I think it's a real issue that's ahead. And I think if we can actually just be a voice that's in that, and today to help somebody maybe take a step and actually trying to understand and really count the cost of leadership.
So with it, leadership is disappointing people at the pace they can stand. I read that and I'm like, yeah, I'm not a very good leader. Can you share a little bit more about what that's looked like for you?
Yeah, I think that, I love change. I'm willing to change really quick in certain areas, and be clear. Certain areas I'm not. But what I've come to realize is that a lot of times we want people to change. We see it. For example, as a leader, you see where you want to go. You see the vision. You see what it's going to take for the business to scale from one to the next. You see what it's going to take that person who is maybe your direct report, and they're trying to advance. They're trying to get a promotion or whatever. And you see what it's going to take for them to get there. But a lot of times they don't see it. And I think what you end up having to do is a lot of times you're like, man, a lot of times people just want to go and say, man, we're about to do this, 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 and this. And when you do that, those end up being big jumps, because they end up being big losses for people. That all of a sudden people have to change things internally. They have to let some things go. That a lot of times people don't want that right away. You know what I mean? And so sometimes you can't lead people somewhere so fast. You have to lead them at a certain pace that they can stand. Because if you lead them way too fast, they're going to walk away. They're going to get angry. They're going to get bitter. They're going to move in a different direction. And so that's the kind of the magic, and that's kind of the dance of leadership. It's trying to be able to disappoint people. And it's just so profound, because no one ever says that leadership is disappointing people. Leadership seems to be, we're leading people, we're pointing a new direction, you're lifting people up, you're, whatever. But it really is disappointing, because I think people, because if they could get there, they would already have done that. And so they need people actually to help them do that. And a lot of times they don't understand what they're going to have to leave.
What does disappointing people and a pace they can stand create within an organization?
I think what it creates in an organization is, one, I think it shows care, that you're actually not trying, you're thinking about the people. Because what you want to do when you talk about disappointing them at the pace they can stand, is that you're not just saying, you're not a leader saying, you know what, I don't care how you feel. I don't care what's going on. We're doing this. And you just need to get along for the ride. And if you can't deal with it, fine, we'll just run over you, right? I think actually the whole point of leadership is you want as many people to come with you. And I think sometimes leaders forget that. The point of the journey is you want people to come with you. And sometimes people have that mentality where they'll be like, well, they just couldn't hack it. So, they had to get off the bus. Well, no, maybe for them, they don't move as fast as you do. So I think that what it does, it shows empathy, shows care. And I think when people get there, they actually are really committed with you too. So I think it builds empathy in the organization, and I also think it builds like commitment and trust within it as well.
Basically what you're saying is it ties to forms of development and empowerment. It's because you're calling them up to who you believe that they should be, who you believe that they can be, based off what they say is important to them, based off what they say they want to commit to.
Yeah, it is. It's that when they say they're committed to something, now you're saying, okay, here's going to be the process to get there. And you just have to find that tension and balance of how fast you push somebody, how slow you go, because a lot of times people really need, it's kind of like working out. You know how it is. It's like when you work out and you're, say you're training somebody and they're trying to get back in shape. And, the worst thing you can do as a trainer is like somebody trying to get back in shape. You're like, all right, hey, dude hadn't worked out in like 4 years. You're like, hey, we're about to put you, like on, like in CrossFit doing the Murph. You know what I'm saying? You're like, all right, well, that brother is never showing up again. You know what I'm saying? You have to build them into it. And I think that's the idea of really good leaders. They see the potential, but then they have a plan, and that's one of the things that's not really there a lot. I think that I find hard is a lot of times there's not a lot of succession planning that goes on to actually lay out for people. Here's the process and plan I see for your development and your growth. And I think that that's where, those are great moments as well, where you actually can help people understand the level of what they're going to have to do. But the other thing I think most leaders, many times, don't realize that they're asking people to lose. I think they're just like, man, this is what you want to gain. But I think we have to be better at talking about what they're going to lose, because I think that's what gets people tripped up from not moving forward. I don't think they actually think about what they're going to have to give up in order to do that.
And it also seems like this is where leaders can typically bring in the idea of positional power in a form of compliance. So if you're not counting the cost, or if you're not counting the cost, it's because you're not being like compliant to the role that you're supposed to fulfill, or what I expect you to fulfill. So that's where the power play seems to come up a little bit. Yeah,
I think so, for sure.
Whenever you are disappointing the people that you lead, that's challenging and that's painful. So how do you navigate when somebody responds with greater levels of criticism, or they're upset, obviously they're disappointed, how do you internally navigate that response?
I think I have to try to look at, one, when they're saying it, why is it making me feel the way that I'm feeling? You know what I mean? Do I feel attacked? Do I feel insecure? That's really important. Like, that's a really important thing, I think, first and foremost. I think once you do it, then you try to look at, man, like, where's it coming from? Some people, they're coming from a place to where, again, if you do it long enough, you can start to see, like, okay, this person's not going to be able to go with you. Because now maybe it's turned from like, hey, they're frustrated that they're losing something, to like, it's gone from frustration to like real anger towards you. Now it becomes unhealthy. And so what I think you try to do, and what I try to do in those moments, is try to see where that person's at, try to see what's going on, see where I can have empathy for them, but also not relent either on what I think is best for them. That's the hardest thing. And I've said it before. You can't lead anything you're afraid to lose. The one thing I have to make sure happens, I think every leader, if you're helping lead people through change, you have to be okay with you may lose them. And I think most leaders are not. And I think that's when they begin to like compromise or go back on certain things. And in the end, it's because of how it's making them feel. They don't like how it makes them feel. They don't like how they're being viewed. And so since they don't like how they're being viewed, they want to kind of tweak it. Or they're worried about, here's the other thing, when a leader's trying to call someone up and that person may want to, they don't like it, they may want to leave. And now here's what's happened with that leader. That leader's starting to realize, oh, my life's going to be a little bit more complicated now, because I'm going to have to go hire somebody new. I'm going to have to take on their responsibilities and stuff like that. So sometimes people just look at them like, I'm good. And here's the problem with that. A lot of times when people who you're working with are elevating, many times you're elevating too. And so I think sometimes leaders, when other people are elevating, you have to lose some stuff as well.
You mentioned something that kind of over time you can start to tell the signs that somebody might be resisting change or resisting loss, and why that might be. For those who maybe don't have the experience to know those signs, can you share some of what you look for and how you navigate them?
I think, first of all, where it starts, when they're really resisting change, I notice this, they begin to become very nitpicky with you and the organization, their leadership. And like with the organization leadership, and sometimes with you as their direct report. I think that's one time it's there. The other thing which you begin to see, I think sometimes, is procrastination in the work, where they're supposed to be doing something and they take forever to kind of do it. The other thing, depending on somebody's personality, they begin to become cynical. They begin to have like little comments here and there. And, another thing which you begin to see, I think sometimes for me, a lot of times is body language. One thing that I notice and check out a lot is people's body language when moments happen. And I think when they're, people coming in and there's just always like more of a, the negative body language and things like that, when normally maybe they don't have that. So I try to look for, when I know there's change happening, are there behavioral changes that are going on? Do they start acting out of character, things that they normally don't do? And so when that's happening, a lot of times I can see that there ends up being resistance, that there's resistance actually going on internally.
Something that we keep using interchangeably is we've been saying resist change, and then we've also been saying resist loss.
Yep.
And so I want to read a quote that we read, and part of what's framing why we're using that kind of language.
Yep.
It's from Leadership on the Line. It says, "People do not resist change per se. People resist loss. You appear dangerous to people when you question their values, beliefs, or habits of a lifetime. You place yourself on the line when you tell people what they need to hear rather than what they want to hear. Although you may see with clarity and passion a promising future of progress and gain, people will see with equal passion the losses you are asking them to sustain."
Yeah.
It's a really good quote. Every time I read it, I'm like, oh my gosh. How do you communicate better to those that you lead what it is that something will cost them, while simultaneously giving them hope for the future without using that hope to water down what the cost is going to be?
I think it's always asking permission, because I think if people, a lot of times I think people want, like, very few people don't want to grow and lead, I think intent. But then when you start laying it out to them, hey, here's what that's probably going to mean, or you still want to do that. And if they give you permission to say, yes, I do want to do that. So I try to be very clear. I try to like undersell something, than oversell it. Okay, man, so sometimes I can be worse than that, because sometimes I can undersell it so bad, right? Give no hope. But I think that's one thing that I try to undersell it. But also the most important part of this process is asking permission. Is this still what you want to do? And then when they say yes, you always can bring them back to that. Hey, well, remember what you said, and remember what I told you was going to happen. That's one thing that I've learned in leadership too. It's super important to explain to people if you've done it enough, what the process is going to look like. Because when it happens, you can remind them, hey, remember when I said this? So, you've heard me say this with different clients that we work with. I always tell them, when people start working with me to start changing, things get worse. For whatever reason, things start, in their life, things that have nothing to do with me helping them develop, starts going crazy. And I tell them this was going to happen, but when it happens, it's going to get better, but you're going to have to weather the storm. And so when the stuff starts happening with them, they're like, I go back, remember what I said, what I'm saying? It's going to get worse before it gets better. Because what that does, that gives them, and, it's kind of like having like it's like being able to grab a hold of a life jacket, like, in the middle of the storm. Because like, I think sometimes leaders, like when people are moving from one place to the next, that's incredibly scary, because there's no guarantees. Like, there's no guarantee that that's going to work out. We hope it's going to work out, but there's no guarantee it's going to work out. And so when they're going through it, sometimes people just need that lifeline to say, hey, remember, you're fine. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, if, when you were trying to learn, teaching my kids how, to swim in the pool, and they get it, and they, the water starts going up or whatever, and they're like, nope, they start panicking, but, you'll grab them, say, hey, you're okay. Like, you're fine. I'm right here, blah, blah, blah. I think sometimes leaders, we have to understand that people need that. We can't just say, well, if they just, they got to figure it out on their own. Like, no, our job is to lead them. And leading people means that sometimes you have to hold people's hands as you're guiding them through tough things. That's leadership. Leadership is not, let me just run so far in front of you to where you're just trying to catch up. Sometimes leading, it is that. Sometimes leading is me coming back, walking side by side with you as we walk through a tough part. Sometimes it's me walking a little bit, pulling you. Sometimes it's getting behind you to make sure you're not slowing down at your pace. So that's leadership. You're trying to lead people somewhere. I think that's where we always have to remind ourselves we're trying to go somewhere. And so if we're going somewhere and we've been there, we're the ones who have to help lead people to that place and talk to them on the journey.